Today, we are diving into one of the biggest questions out there. Where did we all come from? We're going to look at two very different answers, evolution and creationism, and really unpack the frameworks they use to tell the story of our origins. So, let's just get right into it.
I mean, it's the question, right? It's something people have been asking themselves forever. From ancient campfires to super advanced labs, we just seem to have this built-in need to know our origin story. So when you get right down to it, this huge conversation usually lands on two powerful and, totally different explanations. You've got the scientific theory of evolution on one side, and on the other, you have the biblical account of creationism. Let's break down what each one is all about. Okay, first up, creationism. So this view is rooted in the biblical account, from the book of Genesis. The core idea is that the universe, the earth, and every living thing was brought into being by a divine creator through a series of specific, miraculous acts.
And then on the other side of the coin, you have the theory of evolution. This is the scientific framework that explains all the diversity of life through natural processes happening over these just immense stretches of time. The idea is that species slowly change and branch off from common ancestors. So, probably the first and most jaw-dropping difference between these two views is time itself. How old is everything? Well, depending on which story you're following, the answers are not just different, they are worlds apart. And wow, just look at the numbers on this slide. The scale of the difference is staggering. The creationist model, which is often calculated from biblical genealogies, lands on an age of about 6,000 years. The scientific model, based on all sorts of cosmological data, points to 13.8 billion years. That's not a small disagreement, that's a chasm. And yeah, this image really nails those two different starting points. On the one hand, you've got a timeline pulled from biblical history, tracking human events over a few thousand years. And on the other, you've got the scientific model of the Big Bang, which shows the universe expanding over billions and billions of years from a single tiny point. So you can see how these hugely different timelines lead to fundamentally different answers for everything else. Was matter created in a divine act, or did it explode out of a singularity? Was the incredibly complex code in our DNA designed by a creator, or did it emerge from natural processes? Was life created in distinct kinds, or did it bubble up from some kind of primordial soup?
All right, so that's the big picture theory. But what happens when we look at the physical evidence, the stuff we can actually dig out of the ground? Let's talk about the fossil record, because this is where both sides look at the very same rocks and bones, but tell two completely different stories about how they got there.
You see, mainstream geology looks at these rock layers, or strata, as pages in a massive history book, slowly building up over millions of years. The fossils inside represent different chapters, different eras of life. But the creationist model sees those same layers and says, no, this all happened fast. It interprets them as the result of a single catastrophic global flood that buried and sorted everything very, very quickly.
Now, to back up this idea of a rapid, catastrophic burial, proponents of creationism point to some really fascinating fossils. Fossils that they say look like they've captured a single moment, frozen in time. Let's take a look at a few of the examples they use. Okay, check this out. It's a fossil of a fish, caught in the act of swallowing another fish. The argument here is pretty straightforward. For this scene to be preserved perfectly, the burial must have been almost instantaneous. So fast that the fish couldn't finish its lunch or even begin to decay. And then you get things like this. These are called polystrate fossils. What you're seeing is a tree trunk that's standing upright straight through multiple layers of rock. So creationists ask the question, how could a tree stay perfectly upright for millions of years while sediment slowly built up around it? They argue this points to all those layers being laid down at once, in a huge, rapid event. But this one might be the most incredible example of all. This is a fossil of an ichthyosaur, which was an ancient marine reptile, and it was fossilized in the actual process of giving birth. Again, the interpretation here is that this is a snapshot of a catastrophe, a moment of life that was interrupted and buried in an instant.
Okay, so we've looked at individual fossils. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture of life's just unbelievable diversity. I mean, millions and millions of species on Earth. How do these two frameworks explain it all? Well, they use two very different and pretty cool visual metaphors.
I love this slide because it shows the two ideas so clearly. On the left, you've got the evolutionary tree of life. The idea is that all life started from one single common ancestor at the very bottom and then branched out over billions of years into everything we see today. But on the right, you have the creationist orchard. Here, the idea is that a creator made separate kinds of life. Each one is its own distinct tree. Those trees can branch out and diversify, for sure, but one tree never ever turns into a different kind of tree.
And this gets us to a really important distinction. Evolution proposes what's called macroevolution, the idea that over those huge timescales, one kind of animal can literally become a totally different kind of animal, like a reptile evolving into a bird. Creationism, on the other hand, fully accepts microevolution. That's the variation we see within a kind. Think about how a single wolf-like ancestor gave rise to every single dog breed we have today. But it rejects the idea that a dog could ever turn into something that's not a dog, like a cat or a bear.
So what about the blueprint of life itself? What about DNA? Well, surprise, surprise, the same piece of evidence gets viewed through two completely different lenses. To an evolutionist, the fact that humans and chimpanzees share so much of their DNA is powerful evidence that we share a recent common ancestor. But for a creationist, the incredible complexity, the sheer amount of information packed into DNA is seen as evidence of an intelligent designer, kind of like how intricate computer code points to a brilliant programmer. So, as we start to wrap this up, maybe the most important thing to get isn't about deciding who's right and who's wrong here. It's about understanding why they can look at the exact same evidence and come to such wildly different conclusions. And it really all comes down to the framework you start with.
Yeah, there's this quote in the source material that just nails it. It says that your starting assumptions, your worldview, literally shape how you interpret everything you see in front of you.
So here's the bottom line. The theory of evolution starts with the assumption that natural processes playing out over deep time can explain what we see, and it interprets the evidence through that lens. Creationism starts with the assumption that the biblical account is a trustworthy foundation, and it interprets the very same evidence through that lens. The debate in the end is often less about the bones in the ground and more about the philosophical framework you bring with you.
And that really leaves us with a huge final thought, doesn't it? Because this isn't just about evolution and creationism. It applies to everything. So the question is, how do our own starting points, our own hidden frameworks, shape what we see, what we believe, and the conclusions we draw about the world every single day? That's a question that goes way beyond this topic. Thanks for thinking it through with me.